Hey folks, welcome back. It is Siberian, and in today's video we're going to be going over the Sentra ITB build that I've wanted to do. For quite some time I've wanted the car to make more power, and so my plan is to basically have these throttle bodies each per cylinder, and eventually I want to do some kind of methanol injection as well, and possibly add a turbo to the setup. But for the time being, we're just going to concern ourselves with the ITBs. So what you have in front of you here is the BMW S1000RR throttle bodies, and the reason I chose these is because they're 48mm throttle bodies, so it's decently wide. They have each and every single throttle body basically controlled by a single motor, which is essentially how the throttle body operates on the Sentra itself. And it's got a really simple throttle position sensor cable off to the side, which makes it really easy again to kind of splice that in, although ultimately we'll figure out how easy it is or how easy it's not. Now something else, you see that I have the actual intake runners over there, which are kind of long and skinny. Now originally I really wanted to use those because that would give me the power sort of in the mid-range, and I figured, you know, it's going to be fine, it's going to fit. But as I realize now, unless I basically do a hood bulge on the car, I'm not going to be able to actually run those, which is unfortunate. But, you know, on the other hand, what I could potentially do later on down the road is make the intake runners from the throttle bodies into the engine a little bit longer themselves. But as it stands right now, I have shorter velocity stacks on order to be able to basically give me the clearance that I need under the hood of the car as it is stock. Now what I also realized is that I actually needed the intake plenum because of the fact that the car uses an evap valve, and you can kind of see that right here. So it's got, you know, an additional sensor in there as well, so I'm guessing that the computer is either gonna basically put the car in limp mode, or I won't be getting you know, quite as good of a general response from the vehicle because it's gonna, you know, throw codes and stuff like that. And as you can see, there's also another vacuum port, which may potentially be for a brake booster. I'll kind of have to figure that out as time goes on. But the nice thing about, you know, using the stock plenum is that I can still use all the same you know, attachments that I had in terms of the weaponar intake that I have, and in terms of mounting the MAF sensor as well. So that makes it, you know, fairly convenient. The downside, of course, is that I actually wanted to use a carbon fiber plenum from Genv because they make some really awesome products, and that plenum would allow me to flow more air. You know, obviously the other idea was originally to basically just put a filter on each one of these and run it straight from the ITB setup itself. But then I realized that I would be missing the MAF sensor, you know, all these other, you know, basically evap and other sensors would be gone. And I had no way to, you know, put a brake booster anywhere, so that really complicated the setup. Obviously, you know, on older cars it's a lot more simple, but with these new cars nowadays, you have to do kind of a lot more, you know, stuff to get them up and running properly without it, you know, basically freaking out. Now, something else you can see here is that I've actually cut the plenum apart, and what I realized a little too late is that I think I actually got the one for the QR25 engine, or possibly a different model year than my actual car. So it's basically upside down, and I'm going to have to mount it like this as opposed to the other way. But that's fine, so that's what's going to happen here. I've cut it apart because basically I wanted to originally just use it like this and connect that to the ITBs over here. But what I realized is that basically the spacing is completely off, and I don't have a way to basically customize pipes to go from the original plenum into the throttle body. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm basically going to have this sort of 90-degree angle, and so these guys are going to each sit in here and then connect to the bottom of the throttle bodies over here. Now obviously a 90-degree angle for ITBs is far from ideal. You want it to be at the same angle as it's coming out from the engine itself, from the engine block, but due to the spacing issues, again, I really can't do that. One of the biggest things is that the dipstick actually gets in the way, even with just this being mounted pretty much flush against the engine block. So that's, you know, that's a big issue, and part of the issue of why I couldn't run these velocity stacks, which are obviously a lot longer. What I have now, they're probably, you know, the ones that I have on the way are probably like 2 inches, so they're really short. But on the other hand, that also means that they'll be able to fit into the plenum really easily, so that's a win. because on the one hand I'm able to basically increase the air velocity going in, and also the cylinders should each be fed, pretty much the proper amount of air per the original, manufacturer specifications. So there's that, kind of upside to it so far. We'll see, whether or not the car is going to behave when I first basically put this stuff in. We'll kind of see. Right now it's not 100% clear as to whether or not it's going to, work well. But we'll see once I get this up and running. I think the next biggest stage right now is to actually get these sort of oval flanges to adapt to these, circular pipes right here that I just basically picked up from Home Depot. So we'll see how that goes. That will be sort of the next step for me. So I'll show you guys once I do have that all kind of hooked up. The next plan is to have these guys basically adapt to the bottom of the ITBs here. So what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to heat this portion up with some hot air guns and then just sort of fit it over until it slides on. And then I'm just going to have a couple of metal clamps that basically squeeze down so that it stays in place. And then I'm thinking that I might put some silicone around just so that there's no vacuum leak of any kind. Now you can see that I've actually left the original fuel rail in place for these ITBs, and the reason for this is that I want to eventually run methanol through this system. So basically you'll be injecting methanol through the original fuel rail, which is great because obviously the fuel rail is meant to atomize the fuel from the stock bike as it was, and now it's going to be atomizing the methanol, so it's perfect. Obviously, I don't know whether these little shower heads need to actually be activated by a sensor, or if I can just basically dump methanol through them and see if that'll basically work. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. There's still some wiring to figure out. Obviously, I need to see, how well this will play with the Sentra wiring. Currently, I think I might just pick up the cable that was for the bike because I didn't get that when I got these ITBs. So I'll see if I can just splice that in or solder it into the Sentra motor cables. Hopefully you'll be able to control the throttle bodies. If not, I'll have to figure something out as far as, what voltages it runs at and things like that so that it's getting enough voltage to basically run properly. And the other part is obviously both the sensor and the BMW had a throttle position cable, which gave you information about where the throttle butterflies are. And both the Sentra and this bike have that, so it's going to be on me to kind of figure out which pins control what so that it's sending proper information back to the computer. But, that's kind of just teething problems, really. I think for the first part, at least getting it to run in such a way that the car is understanding, the throttle bodies and is able to control them, and then just having it run the intake in general and not kind of hiccup is going to be a big plus. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of recabling that needs to be done as far as these, evap and, brake booster ports and stuff like that. So I'm going to have to get a bunch of new rubber hose to connect it back to its original places. Hopefully that doesn't make the car, kind of freak out, being that it's a longer run of cable. But I think we should be okay. As it stands, it seems like it should be all right. Again, it's all still kind of up in the air. So as it currently is, I sort of just have an idea for what I'm going to do. As to how it's going to get implemented, not entirely sure just yet. I have the basics kind of laid out so far. Obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done with this, but I think the theory is sound, so I should be able to get it up and running. If I do, the throttle response should be pretty immense, definitely a lot faster than it was originally, and so I think that's going to be sort of the biggest win here. At least in the beginning, before the methanol system gets put in place, which is that the car is going to respond to the gas a lot better. Again, reason being for this is because stock, a lot of these MR20D engines are pretty boggy down low, so, people just generally talk about them not being super responsive, or, you push on the gas and then, about 2 seconds later it finally starts spinning up. So that's kind of where I am as well. So, obviously for getting on the highway and stuff like that, that's not ideal because it just takes that much longer for you to speed up and get into the traffic. Something else that's in the works is I have a 2J Racing Pulley That's a crank pulley that's going to go on the car as well. So that should again help the car rev a little bit easier because it's going to remove some of that weight from the crank. Whether or not it's going to make a huge difference as compared to the ITBs is not entirely clear. Obviously the pulley is going to be going in first because it's the easier, of the two to kind of get set up. So I'll probably do a video on the performance differences of the car with the pulley versus without, since I've been driving in the hills quite a bit recently. So I kind of have, a pretty good idea of what my car responds like. So being in the hills with the pulley, I'll be able to tell pretty much immediately if there really is a pretty serious difference. But I think given the fact that it's such a small engine, putting a lighter pulley should make a pretty serious difference overall. And so I think that's really the, the big win there. And I think that ultimately, once that's put in place, with the pulley and the ITBs, it's going to really make a huge difference to not only the power curve, but the torque curve, in general with the car. We're going to see just performance gains in general, but ultimately, again, because of the fact that I will be running the shorter the shorter throttle bodies on this, that means that I won't be getting the power where I want it. It's going to shift the curve more towards the top, I think, which is, obviously not really what I wanted because I really wanted the power kind of in the mid to low range for the hills. But, we'll see. Maybe I'll be able to do something about the spacing and actually be able to run the longer velocity stacks and then just still have them, go into the original plenum. Obviously, that would be the ideal way to do it. Whether it's going to happen or not entirely sure yet. So we'll kind of see. So stick around for my next video, guys. I should have more of the system kind of figured out and set up, and we'll go from there. So take care until then.